My speech is on children and war. This speech is to inform on the topic of children and war, or children and the effects of war. This speech will examine briefly the effects of war as it pertains to children. The term children may mean different ages between different countries. So, for the purpose of this paper, children will mean any person under the age of 18 during the actual warring times. The term effects will mean any influence of war on children, positive or negative. Between 1945 and 1992, there were 149 major wars, killing more than 23 million people. On an average yearly basis, the number of war deaths in this period was more than double the deaths in the 19th century and 7 times greater than in the 18th century. According to the United Nations Children's Fund, or UNICEF, 2 million children have been killed by conflict over the last decade. 6 million children have been made homeless. 12 million have been injured or disabled, and there are at least 300,000 child soldiers operating in 30 different conflicts across the globe. The increasing number of child victims is primarily explained by the higher proportion of civilian deaths in recent conflicts. In the wars of the 18th, 19th, and early 20th centuries, only about half the victims were civilians. In the later decades of this century, the proportion of civilian victims has been rising steadily. In World War II, civilian deaths was 2/3, and by the end of the 1980s, it was almost 90%. A further cause of the rising death toll for civilians is that most contemporary conflicts are not between states, but within them. Rather than being set piece battles between contending armies, these are much more complex affairs. Struggles between the military and civilians, or between contending groups of armed civilians. They are as likely to be fought in villages and suburban streets as anywhere else. In this case, the enemy camp is all around, and distinctions between combatant and non-combatant melt away in the suspicious and confusions of daily strife. In 1994, the UN Department of Humanitarian Affairs reported that 13 countries had ongoing complex emergencies of this type, and it classified over 20 million people as vulnerable. It also listed 16 other countries with these potential emergencies. They should not be called emergencies, though, because they are usually politically charged. An emergency gives the idea that it may suddenly end, where with politically charged conflicts, it is up to those in charge and those making the decisions as far as when the emergency will end. Families and children are not just getting caught in the crossfire, but they are also likely to be specific targets. This is because many contemporary struggles are between different ethnic groups in the same country or in former states. When ethnic loyalties prevail, a perilous logic clicks in. The escalation from ethnic superiority to ethnic cleansing to genocide, as we have seen, can become an irresistible process. Killing adults is then not enough. Future generations of the enemy, their children, must also be eliminated. As one political commentator expressed it in a 1994 radio broadcast before violence erupted in Rwanda, quote, "To kill the big rats, you have to kill the little rats." End quote. The underlying tensions that eventually erupt in violence are often easy enough to identify. As Peter Hansen, United Nations Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, recently noted, given our awareness of the circumstances and conditions which generate marginalization and vulnerability, exploit differences, and exacerbate tensions, one not need be an Einstein to determine that tackling root causes is the only answer if we're serious about preventing conflict. An obvious way, then, to prevent conflict is to reduce tensions. It could be argued that the reason many countries have not fallen victim to widespread violence is precisely because they have pursued policies of more equitable development and effective social integration. Malaysia, for example, is ethnically diverse. The majority of people are the indigenous Bumiputra population, but 30% are Chinese and another 8% Indian. Following race riots in 1969, the government there introduced clear policies to distribute the benefits of economic growth more equitably and thus reduce the potential for social tension. An effective way of reducing tension is to ensure equal opportunities for all children. Meeting their needs and investing in their healthy development is the foundation for more stable societies. Children themselves, of course, have an important contribution to make in trying to avoid the mistakes of their parents. Schools can foster these ideals through courses that allow children to explore ways of resolving disputes between individuals and communities that do not rely on violence. Education for peace is often thought of as a form of reconciliation after war is over, but it also has potential for prevention. Many parts of the world are already in an unstable situation where violence seems a likely outcome. In these circumstances, the international community needs effective early warning systems to permit speedy mediation. A number of international groups, notably the human rights organizations, perform a valuable service. However, receiving a warning and acting on it are two different matters. As United Nations Secretary General Boutros Ghali has observed, the whole idea of preventative diplomacy is something new and thus not readily accepted. It is like the introduction many years ago of insurance for your car. People were at first not ready to spend money on an accident that might never happen. After Rwanda, where serious observers still fear a renewed outbreak of genocidal strife, the contiguous country at risk is Burundi, where the United Nations currently has people on the ground monitoring the situation. Thus far, the presence of the Secretary General's Special Envoy and the development of human rights monitors, along with a mission from the Organization of African Unity, may have helped reduce the toll from ethnic fighting. Even in this case, however, the UN Center for Human Rights has found it very difficult to raise sufficient funds to pay for the monitors it needs. After World War I, Eglantine Jebb, one of the founders of British Save the Children Fund, who had organized food for needy children on both sides of the conflict, she was charged in the United Kingdom with having given aid and succor to the enemy. "My lord," she is said to have responded, "I have no enemies below the age of 11." She was acquitted. Similarly, during World War II, the establishment of what is now Oxfam was based on defiance of official opposition to aiding civilians in Belgium and Greece who were suffering from the Allied blockade. From poverty to destruction, war is a machine that, when oiled and running, will change a child's life forever. This paper, very, very briefly, touched on the topic of children and the effects of war. I hope you are now more informed on the subject. Thank you.